Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Crow's Drinking Buddies, or the Crow's Nest Podcast. Jello never gave me a definitive answer on names, so I'm just going to go with both. Ta-da. Great intro. But I am your host, Wolf, for this week, and I am joined by...
Hello, my name is Ursula. I have been on the Nest since its founding, technically. And I'm here for a podcast, so yay.
That's the other two. There you go.
My name is Caff. I've been on the Nest for a bit over 2 years now. And whatever, yes. Go.
And I'm Dylan. I'm the young boy of the group. I've only been here a few months.
Oh.
You're but a baby.
Well, hello and welcome to all of you, and to those listening. Today we're going to be covering a bit of a different topic from our first episode. We're going to be covering OCs, specifically RWBY OCs. To give a
To
give a bit of background, an OC is an original character that a fanfic writer or fan has created to insert into the world of RWBY, specifically. That's a very basic definition, but it should cover us going forward. With that said, jumping right into things. First question on the list, do you like OCs or do you dislike them?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants...
I mean, it always depends.
Ursula, would you like to take the tackle it first?
I would, yes. I think OCs are a very touchy subject because... Well, it really stems from the stereotype of OCs. Not in RWBY. Let's go with RWBY particularly. You'd see a lot of people who see OCs as that cringy thing, quote unquote, that someone decided to just have their character with silver eyes and is half grim and has this tragic backstory that involves Salem somehow. If you ask me. Yeah, exactly. And that's fully ironic, Caff, and you'll see why later. You know why, but I digress. The thing, a good OC, if you ask me, and the OCs that I like specifically, okay, are either OCs that blend into the main cast, let's say a future offspring of some of the main characters. Let's say, I don't know, Ruby and Weiss. Not the point. The point is, this is one way to make an OC that feels natural. It makes an OC feel real. Another one is a person, and that's my... I think I'm going too far with this. Basically, I think OCs can be good. I personally like them. I just think that a lot of people can... I can see how a lot of people dislike them because of past experiences.
That's fair. Who would like to go next?
I guess I will. I guess it's kind of weird because if you have OCs, you can't really dislike them as a concept because that's like having your cake and eating it as well. But yeah, I generally like OCs on the basic level that, you know, they don't try to subvert too much of the canon already, without, of course, proper reason or a genuine reason. Because how many times have we seen OCs that come in and say, oh, they're first years, but they're already better than Pyrrha for whatever fucking reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's those are those OCs I tend to have problem with, but yeah,
That's fair.
that's about it.
I do see where you come from. That's that understand.
Like, of course, like they've been OC's been around for a long time, and it's difficult to differentiate what is an OC that someone's actually put time and effort in, and someone's just, you know, done it for the sake of doing it, and it's just gone all over the wall, so to speak.
That's fair. Dylan, you're up.
Alright. So, I really like making characters for anything, whether they're OCs for a different sort of fandom, or just like making a character in general. And I do like them, but you obviously see people who don't understand like the source material that the OC is going to be in sometimes. Like, sometimes you need boundaries when you're making an OC. Otherwise, you can go out of control and you're like... or you make a character too similar to an already established one and you're like, well, that's just a gender swap of RWBY or something. It's like, come on.
And you're just like, what's the point?
Yeah, it's like you just made John female. At that point, you're better off just making an AU where John is female.
No, yeah, that's fair.
By the way, another way, if you ask me, OCs can be good in, is taking the canon into account as in, well, we saw the show, we saw the people RWBY interacts with, well, let's say the main team. Your OC isn't amongst those people. If you want to avoid the cringe, don't have your OCs be RWBY's best friend from a few years ago that was suddenly introduced into the plot out of nowhere.
But those are the best, because what's better than having RWBY already have an established boyfriend or girlfriend, and they sneak into Beacon at night.
Yeah,
No.
and they're better, and they're better than Pyrrha somehow.
So,
Oh, you totally break
Yeah.
up and just have Weiss have someone so she's not actually isolated. It's like, come on, you're messing with the entire concept of the character.
Wait,
there.
do you mean Weissolated?
Oh God!
I was told there were going to be no puns here.
Oh my God!
write down Caff as someone we're not bringing back. Send that to Jello.
Yes, I have finally established my dominance.
Just to let him know. But yeah, I'll say I don't mind OCs. I think they can fit in perfectly well so long as you think about how you want to use them. I will say, right, I'll disagree a bit about the idea that an OC can't have an established past with a main character. I think you can do that. Again, it all comes down to that how you do it and making sure you do it well, right? Like the idea that, Caff joked about having the OC sneak into Beacon at night and be one of the main characters' established girlfriend or boyfriend, or having a past that connects them so well that it's a little bit too appropriate, that it's a little bit too on the nose, maybe a little bit too cringeworthy, things of that nature. Like, you can overdo it, but there is a way I think you can do it, right? That being, maybe they did know each other, maybe they were friends, maybe there was a connection there at some point, but things change and people fade away, things of that nature. You can do that, you can achieve that. It all depends on your skill and talent as a writer, as well as just generally thinking about how you want it to play out. But in general, yeah, I'll agree, OCs for the most part can be good. With that said,
Bruh, imagining having talent.
I think I want to put this on the table because it's one of my general rules of thumb for not even OCs. It's even in general. Okay, there's no such thing as bad ideas as much as bad
Absolutely.
writing. Any idea can work. Even if you want to make, for example, Salem's nephew who works in an art college or something, you can do that, and it might even work well. But that depends on your skills as a writer, not on the merit of your idea.
agreed.
Now I'm just imagining that person, that Salem's nephew, getting calls from saying like, "Why don't you get a real job? Stop being a disappointment."
Ouch.
No, he kidnaps Ruby, and he's also a half Grim. This is a reference, by the way, for someone who was in the nest once. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
With that said, we talked mostly about OCs from a writing standpoint, but what about RP standpoint? Because I know some of you here are definitely role players, so what about OCs from that standpoint? How do you see them in that regard?
Well, I see OCs from role-playing standpoint as a way to create a story.
Yeah.
I know it might sound a bit contradictory because usually, let's say in a tabletop scenario where you have a GM and a bunch of players, you'd expect the GM to be the one to handle the main overall story. He has the plot he wants to show to the people, and the players are there to experience it. It's not that clear cut. I'm aware. I'm just trying to I'm just trying to
Mhm.
make a point. When I approach a tabletop or role playing or any of those things, I come with the notion that I want to tell a story too. I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story, and I want to experience it, and I want this development to happen.
Sure.
Yeah, from a role-playing standpoint, it's very interesting because it's almost like you're taking on a different persona of a different character. Because if you do your OC well enough, they can have these different tics or these different pieces of their personality that normally you wouldn't find within yourself or with anybody else. That's kind of interesting because it forces you to think, like, wait, how would my character react in this situation? How would they say this? If someone stole their sweet roll, how would they react? Uh, but it's kind of it is kind of interesting because at that point you're kind of writing your own story. You just don't put it. You're just not creating uh, the backstory or the current setting. Well, sometimes you do, but yeah, it's just kind of like writing a story, to be honest.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I do see that they do come problems with RP, especially when you're using an OC that some people won't understand the character the way you do, and subsequently it becomes a lot harder to use them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
What are you saying? Like the personality of the OC is preventing them from understanding the character they're talking to, or
No, I'm more of like the other role players are
Ah.
struggling to play off the OC you've created, and that I can see. I might have struggled with that a few times.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's definitely. Oh, go
I
ahead.
will say, I will say that an issue I found more than once is either the emotions of the character can bleed to you, and then you start taking things maybe a bit too personally, or alternatively, you can't connect to them enough, and then you can't really you feel like you can't emulate them because your own emotions and tendencies get in the way.
Okay.
You know,
that's
like
true.
I have a specific character that I'm gonna bring it out in a later section. Hopefully, I want to talk about her, and she's supposed to be very grizzled, very sassy, very rough around the edges. And anyone who knows me knows that's the least person that I am. So it's always been kind of an issue trying to find out how to act that way while still connecting to it despite it not really being me. It's kind of weird.
It can make sense. I can understand that. So,
Mhm.
with all of that said, we talked a bit about this here and there already, but let's jump straight into it and get a bit more specific. And talk a bit about the good and the bad that can come with OCs. Who would like to start us off?
I think for a change, maybe we can switch the order and start with Dylan.
Yeah, sure. The good about OCs is it helps you look at the world with different characters. And it also lets you, through like a story, explore how different people especially in Remnant, live. Like, we've never seen a regular school, and that's just weird to me. Like, we know of the academies, but what do normal people do in school in Remnant? And you can do that.
That's
Oh,
actually something.
are
I
you,
actually do agree.
yeah, are you like saying that while the show does nicely reflect on how the huntsmen and huntresses of Remnant seem to do their day-to-day job, you don't seem to find much comparison about how, okay, Jimmy down the street in accounting, how he does his job, or Karen in accounting, Daniel in accounting. There's a lot of people in accounting in Remnant, apparently. But you're saying like you don't seem to see much about how people live their lives. I mean, I think the closest example we've gotten is it Jean's eldest sister. I think that's
Yeah.
Saffron.
Yeah.
No, is that
Saffron
Yeah.
and Terracotta.
like these are the only two people who are quote unquote normal, and this is the first time we've seen people outside of the dark and grim of the world.
Yeah, I just want to know what the prices on Grim Insurance is, what are the rates going for it.
I think the bigger question is, why in the name of heck does not everyone activate their aura? Think about it for a second. It's a fast, easy process that doesn't require much of you. Just requires some person to put their hand on your shoulder and say something. Okay? And even if you never train with it, at the very least, you get a free force field and healing factor.
Because the writers don't want you to think about that. Shush.
Completely different topic aside. Back to the one we're on. OCs.
Yeah, but there are also bad things about OCs, which are overpowered ones. When
Oh,
they,
Oh my god.
they don't really deserve to be overpowered in, the situation. Mary Sue or Gary Stu comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of.
I mean, actually,
My character is great, and if your character doesn't like her, then your character is a bad person.
I've heard of that one before too.
I've actually found it really interesting when you read fan fictions and you see them like grab the original cast, but then they kind of mold them into something they would have never been to begin with. I always find that kind of interesting. Or obviously, this character is obviously their favorite character, so they try to up them up, so to speak. So it's definitely kind of interesting to see how your own biases and how your own preconceptions about the story and about the
That does bring up a good.
the
That does
franchise
bring
can
up a good
bleed.
question. At that point, would you consider them an OC as well, or no? Or is it one of those? It depends.
Well, it's always
I
have
guess
the baseline, don't you? You have the baseline of the character.
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends because with so for instance, bloody hell, let's just say because you're not gonna necessarily call John an OC when let's just say for instance canonically he likes to put his cereal in before his milk. You're not gonna exactly call him an OC if he puts his milk before his cereal. A roundabout way of saying it, but
It depends really on how much you deviate. Well, you know what? No, I actually disagree on that. I'll tell you why. I think that a main character is a main character. You can take a main character and give them different traits. Maybe give them, maybe put them in an AU where things went differently and they became a different person. But I don't think anyone would see them and think, oh, it's not the character I know, it's a completely different person. They'd still, let's say, I'll give you an example, okay? Let's say you make Weiss in an AU where she's a werewolf. She's not gonna be seen as an OC because it's an AU, but she's a werewolf. That's just, it's still Weiss.
Okay.
actually that brings up another interesting thing that I want to talk about. What about characters who barely exist in the show to begin with? For instance, like Cardin or
I think
Port
a
or
good example would
Ublek,
be
like
some
characters
of the
who've had
teams we saw at the Vital Festival, like
yeah,
Ciel, for an example,
like
Penny's partner.
Cardinal or Bronze or
Mhm.
Auburn.
In my opinion, they still aren't considered. They still don't get the, let's call it, OC slot, so to speak. Okay? Because they were introduced in the show. You cannot deny that.
I would agree with that. I think you're definitely adding a lot of character to them, and they definitely are, for the most part, very much blank slates. So, personally, at that point, I wouldn't necessarily consider them OCs. I would consider it, you adding to that character. It's the same with the main cast. If you did it for the main cast, I personally would consider it adding to that character. There does become a point, though, where, say you take RWBY and she's vastly different from how we see her in the show. Like, say, for instance, from the bubbly, hyper optimistic outlook that she normally has to something that is entirely pessimistic and I hate the world and I hate everything and I'm just going to destroy it all.
Alcoholic weed smoker.
There is a
There
fanfic
is,
like that,
I know.
Demon.
And there's a fanfic for everything.
This is also true.
Yeah, pretty much.
But, okay.
Yeah, like... No, never mind. I was just gonna make a bad joke. I digress.
I mean, I said Wystellation. I don't think he can get as bad as that.
Grimlord Naruto.
It's close.
Oh, that's
It's
juicy.
close.
Never challenge me again.
But yeah, like,
Oh god.
the point is like, I do think there is a point where you can maybe get a bit away from the, too far away from the original character, where it doesn't become an OC, but it does, get into being out of character, right? But that can be an entirely different topic in and of itself. Going back to the main topic at hand, is there anything else anybody would like to say about the good and the bad that can come with OCs?
Well, like I said earlier, it really depends on one's quality as a writer. Like, this is actually... I think there are a few traits that OCs in RWBY could have that people intrinsically just say is bad, like having silver eyes, or being part grim, or being edgy. Some things people just naturally look at, and because of so much past experience and, like, seeing people do it badly, just say, don't do it, it's bad, and that's it. Just close the book on it.
I mean, with the silver eyes, I can kind of explain why people get mad, because you're saying so. Because like silver eyes, we've like determined that it is a rare genetic trait, and it's basically a nuke for Grim. But
yeah,
you're
only
kind of
3
making
characters.
you're kind of taking away the uniqueness of it all.
But you
And
could
this is
write
really-
down a good way. If, you just don't have them close to RWBY, and you can make it unique if it's like a student from a different school.
Yeah, and besides, this is actually the pretty thing about RWBY OCs, is that the whole world is based on the concept of uniqueness and individuality and colors. So, really, it's not like let's say you wanted to make an OC for another fandom. Usually, you'd find far more strict rules on what your character can do. Okay, in RWBY and other shows, I'm gonna bring another example, like My Hero Academia, which I haven't seen, but I've seen enough of to understand the concept. Okay, you have freedom to basically do whatever you want, and people naturally get attracted to that.
So, would you say, like, RWBY inherently opens itself up more to OCs? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
I think that's part of the reason why OC culture is so
strong within RWBY,
flourishing. Exactly, because the world itself is. There's a saying I have, which I think kind of fits here. Remnant isn't a world; it's a world template. Okay, it's a bit of a jab at the writers, because I do think that there's a lot of plot holes that they will never cover. Okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to get into that point. What I'm trying to say is, the world is broad enough, wide enough, and vague enough that people can basically insert their own lore into the show without it seemingly being out of place.
That's fair.
For example, dust infusions. Until Hazel did it, we've never seen it. It was only mentioned once in a World of Remnant video that got forgotten with time. Okay? But anyone could take it in a different direction, and then you have a lot of different breeds of OCs created from the same idea taken to different directions. And none of them necessarily feel like they're so out of place that they just don't belong.
That's true. I would agree with that, yeah. That's actually a good way to look at it.
Yep.
Anything else anyone would like to add before we move on?
What about you, Demon? What do you think?
I mean, we never really mentioned the idea of self-inserts. Those can generally be done as everyone else. Yeah, that gives you a good example of what people tend to think right there. Those can be done well, they can be done poorly. More often than not, you'll see done poorly. Like with anything else we've spoken about here, I think it does fall on the writer who's writing it. If you have the skill to back it up and you've thought about everything, you can do it well. If you haven't done all of that, you can do it poorly. As I'm sure most of our listeners will have seen many different examples of all of these things being done poorly. But go ahead.
No.
Well, if that's all for this topic, going right along, do you prefer to read stories about the main cast of RWBY, or do you prefer stories that feature OCs more?
Can I?
You go.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's that much of a fair comparison, because stories that feature the main cast of RWBY and stories that feature OCs, at least for me, fulfill completely different niches in what I look for. Okay. Usually, when I look for stories that feature the main cast, I'm looking for content that includes the characters that I already like.
Makes sense, yeah.
Alternatively, when I look for stories that feature OCs, I'm not necessarily looking for RWBY as much as I'm looking for stories inspired by RWBY. It's kind of hard to differentiate. OCs, for me, really fit better in terms of roleplay and places where people can get to know the character, like, intimately. Where fanfics are where you'd see MCs more, for example. Okay. It's a bit hard to explain, I'll admit.
Caff?
But that's what I have to say.
To me, it's like it's kind of interesting because that's from what I've understood and what I've understood, what I've seen is that a lot of fan fiction is based around the main cast, and if there are OCs, it's intrinsically wrapped up in the main cast. I don't think I've really seen that many fan fictions where the main cast is just mentioned only without having much to do with the plot of the fiction itself. I've only really seen where they've either got this OC for interaction with the main characters and they just don't go on with a unique or on its own story with their OC. It's just like, you'd see, like, there would be only, like, the student still goes to Beacon and they still interact with the main cast without going into any of what their peculiar lives are like.
Okay. Dylan?
Well, the way that the RWBY story has been told thus far, it's really hard to do a completely original story without changing a lot, because the story is really pushed by the main characters. Like, you always have to have PvP, which means Penny and Pyrrha will always have to show up. You have to have the Yang Mercury fight and your OC's reaction to that. So it will always happen. If you want to continue along that way, of course you could just do a slice of life sort of Beacon one, and it's just what your characters do and then they go off, and Salem doesn't interact with yours at all.
Actually, it's kind of interesting because I'm part of an RP server where the DM, he's practically a DM. He's kind of made it interesting where he's kind of subverted the canon. So basically, what happened in the PvP fight is that, like, it's basically he's brought in this new thing called brought in this new kingdom, or soon to be kingdom, called the Vault, where it's supposed to be like a brand new kingdom, and people are sending their children there to learn what's going on. And with the PvP sections and all the fights, what happened is that when Yang fought Mercury, what happened is that they had technology that discovered that there was a semblance influencing what was happening in the arena, and that was promptly put a stop to. So in that AU, as he's written, the Yang doesn't break, quote unquote, Mercury's legs, and but instead of the Grim invading, he has done something else, which I find kind of interesting, to be honest.
A solution I've seen. Well, I have seen several, but including my own writing, by the way. But I'll give an example of a RWBY game I have IRL. Okay, with a few friends and a GM. He actually made a whole system for the game. It's like a homebrew system entirely. Anyway, what he did, his solution was to just put us in a different time zone. You know, like our characters exist like, I want to say, 30 something years before the main canon of the show. So we won't. So it's still technically the same timeline, but we won't really be interacting with many of the main characters because they haven't even been born yet.
Interesting.
Another solution is to either embrace the idea of characters who just do their own thing that aren't really related to Team RWBY. And by the way, Caff, what you said about Spix that just mentioned Team RWBY in the background, I've done that. Like, literally done that. Just mentioned the fact that, like, I have a fanfic I did, and at some point, one of my characters had to clean the dining hall because of the food fight that happened because of Team RWBY. So she spends like the whole time just cussing them for being absolute assholes. Like, they aren't there, but basically there is reference to actions Team RWBY has done.
Could be an interesting way of doing it.
Okay.
Bringing up RP, since you two have brought it up, do you prefer to not being an RP or not really having RP'd ever before myself? Do you prefer to RP OCs or do you prefer to RP the main cast of RWBY or different characters from RWBY?
It really depends on what you're looking for in the role.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Dylan, if you ever want to say something, you can jump in.
Feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, like I'm sorry if I'm.
Nah, it's okay.
Never mind.
So it always depends on what type of character you're gonna RP from the actual characters as well. Like, I really enjoy using Weiss. She's really fun. But if you ask me to roleplay John, I wouldn't do it because I just don't like that sort of character to play as. I can play with someone else playing as Jean, but I can't do the sort of dorky character like that.
Completely fair. I understand that. It was a curious question to ask since I do have RPers here with me. Moving on, we are getting a little bit tight on time, so moving right along to the next question. As I'm sure we're all writers here, and we've all wrote a little bit, do you prefer writing for RWBY, or do you like to write for OCs more?
I think I've actually had experience writing for both. I had my first fanfic ever was written for MCs, and I had a later one that was about my own OC team. And I found the OC team to have a lot more freedom in it. You know?
Understandable.
I could actually like go and explore my own ideas without having to be constrained or afraid of what will happen because of the canon.
I've only majority of my fics have either been about what's happened in canon, and it's just like, you know, this little scene of what's happened after, for instance, the Battle of Haven, or there's been like a different AU. But I've never really written my any OCs in my fictions before, and I don't, because that purely stems from the fact that I don't feel comfortable in doing that, because unless it's for a specific reason, I don't feel very comfortable in writing my own OCs, because I feel like, you know, I run the risk of, you know, being those people who just chuck in their OCs because whatever.
Or you power creep, different things that you feel like you're going to fall into the same mistakes you might criticize others for falling into as well.
Oh yeah,
I'm
definitely.
the same way.
Don't want to look like a hypocrite.
Yep.
Oh god, no, not the hypocrisy.
I'm very much the same way. Most of my writing has been for the main cast. As a matter of fact, all of my writing has been for the main cast. There are ideas I've had for thinking about using OCs. I even have a quote-unquote OC team that I thought about, I will admit, but I've never wrote anything for them for much the same reason Cav has as well, because it very much comes down to a fear of, I don't want to end up falling into those same pitfalls. Like, I can sit back and point them out and say, oh, these aren't great, but if you fall into them as well, then, what does this say about you, right? I do like...
I've actually never wrote about Team RWBY or any canon characters. The only story I ever done was about an OC team that went to Beacon and were full of different personalities, and it was really fun. Whereas if I were to write about Team RWBY or canon characters, I feel sometimes you can feel like you won't capture the character as people perceive it or how the writers wrote it originally, and that can come with problems.
Yeah. I personally do enjoy writing for the main cast a bit more, I would say. Just for the simple fact that I enjoy the idea, or I feel like it's a bit of a challenge trying to write the main cast into the situation you want them to be in, right? Like, for me, I've read a story in the past about, it's definitely changes things up a lot, where RWBY was actually blind, right? And that definitely changes things up a lot. But how do you write in that situation? How do you write RWBY as being a blind character while also trying to keep that same personality and not make it too different? I do find that...
Man, that reminds... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to finish off with, I find that enjoyable personally.
It just reminds me of my first fanfic.
All the interruptions. Go for it, Ursula.
I just remember my first fanfic where Yang, it was okay. I'll say it briefly because it's a really interesting point. So when Volume 3 ended, and I saw Yang lost her arm, I was like, oh wait, dust infusions are a thing. What if she infused herself a dust arm? And I was like, oh man, that's a really cool idea. Someone must have made some fanfic about this. There's no way no one else thought about this. It turns out no one else thought about this.
It is a bit out there.
So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna write it myself.
Switch on, I'll get them.
Yep. And that's how basically my online life began, with a fanfic about Yang getting a dust arm.
Does it have a vibration function?
Not...
Oh man, that's fanfic. I won't talk about it now in length because it's not really the topic for now, but it had a lot of cool stuff in it. Even if the writing was shit.
Fair enough.
Always self-critical, aren't you?
Hey, I'm allowed to criticize my first fanfic. I'm doing it in a good
own
mood.
Worst critics, as they always say. Moving right along to what I assume is going to be the big meat of this main topic. Personal RWBY OCs. Do you have them? Why did you create them? And what do you mainly like to use them for in regards to RWBY?
Oh boy.
Can
I start this
sure,
one?
You can start.
Oh boy!
So, I've seen you said here a limit of 2 OCs. Do you mean 2 OCs per person?
Possibly one. We're running a little bit on time, so might go with one. Okay, pick one for now.
So I'll start with the biggest. I'll start with the biggest one. Percy Periwinkle Valier. My essentially flagship RWBY OC. A complete edge lady, used to be a street thug, and her semblance is aura draining. All of those are a mixture that is designed to make a character that looks as edgy as possible, while actually still having a person behind it. And that's something I wanted to say earlier, and I was saving it for this topic, is that my process for creating OCs is taking the things that people hate the most and using them just to prove a point that you can make them into good characters.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you.
Yeah, exactly. That's why my characters, I'll say it in a nutshell, my OC team includes a prototype of Penny, said edge lady with aura draining for a semblance, a silver-eyed nun, yes, I did both Silver Eyes and Religion in the same character, and a giant faunus and a giant that was born dust-infused. And literally from the womb all the way up, born with dust coursing through their system. It's a very interesting team, and I love it very much. But back to Percy. As of late, I've mainly been using Percy for role-playing. She is my character in that tabletop game I mentioned earlier, where I actually found a lot of interesting things come when you give your character's backstory to a GM to tamper with. because thanks to him, Percy's character changed a significant amount, and I love it because he essentially gave me the idea that her semblance is hereditary, which makes things very interesting in terms of character development, about her parents, where about her parents that she wants to kill. I digress.
Sounds complicated.
It's been a ride. It's definitely been a ride, and I love her very much. And I'll also mention, to a lower degree, I think I'll go with Jin. Jin is the dust-infused character, who is one of the weirdest characters I have ever made, because I can't even explain her. That's how weird she is. It's like...
Our
we
minds
all
are not
see
big
the
enough to
world.
comprehend.
It's like I'll try and explain it briefly. She can see auras, and she's also face blind, which means she cannot really recognize facial features together and form a person of it. So she ends up seeing everyone by their auras entirely, which creates a character that instead of seeing you by your skin color / gender / fauna trait / whatever, sees you by your soul.
Wow. Scary.
Like I said, it's a very alien topic, even for me, and then I made her. Anyway, that's the gist of my RWBY OCs. Weird as fuck people.
Fair enough. Moving on. Who would like to go next?
Want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, the character who I like the most, my favorite OC is called Ice. Very original name. Ice Oyer. He is estranged from his family and lives alone in the Vale Mountains. He's not a particularly educated character, but he's just so fun to use. He has sort of the RWBY innocence to him, and it's just fun to have such a joyful, not smart arsery character. A character who looks at the world differently to the population at large. And he loves animals, but he's also a strong character because he's lived alone and just knows how to survive. Compared to my other character, who may or not be related to Ice secretly, is his twin sister, who is Grey, and she is completely different, as she is a superstar pop singer from Atlas. And
Oh, lovely.
just having two characters so different, and they're actually siblings separated at birth, and cliche, and but it's super fun. And when they finally reconnect, it's all emotional, and it's just so fun to write these two. And they have Ice's semblance is sort of like a different sort of Yang's, where he has more of a drawback, where he doesn't necessarily get stronger in power, but he just gets more animalistic and wilder. So it sort of, as he gets hurt, his humanity drops away, and it's hard to control him, and only certain things can bring him back.
Alright.
Whereas
So he gets more ferocious.
yeah, and
I like it.
and it
He
can
has the big mood.
and it can bring in help other characters, because I use him mostly for RP, and it helps other characters show how Ice feels towards them if he goes berserk. And then Grey's semblance is, of course, being a singer. She has a supersonic scream, and that's just fun to use. And
Shall I go?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. No, you finish up.
Nah. And and Grey, and I also bring a fun thing of where Grey doesn't, neither of them know their mother. Ice was seen by the father, and Grey was dropped on a doorstep. And Grey was raised by Faunus in Atlas, in Lower Mantle, and so it's a very unique character, and I just love writing them.
No, that's perfectly fair.
So yeah.
You sure she wasn't dropped on her head instead of on the doorstep?
Hey, that's rude.
Caff being rude as usual.
Um,
Go for it.
I'm being
Yes.
rude as usual.
Now, Caff, please tell us about your OCs that I have a lot of history with.
Oh boy! I never expected to get like this. Yes, I do have quite a few. The two I will bring mention to is a big lad called Moogle and another big lad named Citron. The thing with
Caff loves
Moogle
his
is
big
that
boys.
he is a giant of a
You have a
man.
type,
He's
Caff?
in the 7 foot.
Big lad, do you have a type?
Oh, don't you know it?
Loves the big boys.
I hear you. Anyways, and his semblance has in a more crude form does manipulation similar to Weiss's. However, it's a bit more crude. While she can do finer arts like what she does with Mutant Master, he can't really do that much. So he can't send out laser beams or something like that. And he's kind of interesting because I've written it so with his semblance, it's kind of tied into his personality where he's constantly afraid that he'll either blow up the people that he loves or he blows himself up, which it's kind of nerve-wracking to be
Sounds
honest.
like a charming fellow.
Oh, he's the biggest lovable person you'll ever met. It's just don't get
Except when it comes to interacting with Ice. He just bullies Ice.
I mean, that's because Ice is so bullyable. But I digress.
Oof. Wow. Oof.
Takes advantage of my innocent boy.
But yeah, it's interesting to kind of create a shy person who does have a powerful semblance, but he's afraid to use it just in the case that he hurts the people he loves. And the other one is Citron, which it's an interesting thing because I've based him off on an already established character in a franchise. That's another thing that's interesting. Characters being established as inspirations, but I've kind of made him like a wisecracking wisecracking teacher that's been called in to be a sort of teacher for Beacon, and it's interesting to have the two interact with each other.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Demon?
Oof, you're asking me. I don't have that many OCs. Hardly any at all. And like I said, most of them aren't...
I mean, you haven't said peep.
This is true. Most of them aren't very well fleshed out. I guess I could talk about the one who's probably somewhat fleshed out, and that being Ayla. I do like the idea of her, a character with the semblance to... Because I'm very creative, the ability to touch another person's weapon and be able to control that weapon. I like...
Okay.
She basically... Think of it sort of like telekinesis, but it only works with inanimate objects, and she has to touch them first. Otherwise, it will not work. Right? I like the idea of it. That's about all I can say to her. Like I said, not very well fleshed out. I've never done anything with the character. After that, something I created more recently for a story that I've been personally working on right now. She's also not very well fleshed out. She's also not very well fleshed out at all, and she's really not intended to be. She's very much so mostly used to push a story forward and just there as background. But her name is Merle, and she's just a rabbit faunus, very much similar to Velvet, and she's just a guard for Kali, and that's pretty much it. So nothing much from me, unfortunately.
I do want to add one tiny thing about Jin, just because it's a fun tidbit. Her semblance went through a lot of variations. Like initially, I said to myself, she survived being dust infused because of 1,000,000 to 1 chance, and basically her semblance, because her physiology is so fucked up, her semblance is basically walked away. In recent variations, her semblance, it's what's keeping her alive, basically. in what I'd call like a dust symbiosis, basically. It's like basically forcefully adapting to such a dust-rich environment by developing a semblance that allows you to adapt to it and survive with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Just we're talking about dust infusions and all that.
No, that's not a problem at all.
Bye.
I suppose, though, if that is everyone's kind of talked about their OCs, we've hit the end of the topic. So I guess we've reached our end here, ladies and gentlemen. So I do hope you've enjoyed the Crow's Nest podcast with Crow's Drinking Buddies.
I know I have.
We do hope we're able to do more of this in the future, and we do hope you enjoy it, like I said, and that you'll want to listen to more of these in the future. With all of that said, that's been us. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and until next time, take care.
Bye.
Bye.